And we've seen people reclaim their life and their independence to go back to work. And it's never too late because the brain won't stop connecting as long as you provide the just right challenge.
Welcome back to Brain, sponsored by Toro and Tides. March is Brain Injury Awareness Month, and to honor the importance of this month, Brain to Brain has shifted to weekly Friday drops, in addition to our Tuesday Talks episodes. So throughout this month, you've been getting 2 episodes every single week. Now, these Friday episodes have featured leading voices in medicine, advocacy, and lived experience, all focused on recovery, awareness, and improving life for the brain injury community. Today, sadly, marks the final episode of our awareness series for March. It was supposed to be just for 1 month, but I'm happy to say this isn't the end. The response to this series has meant too much and reached too many people for us to stop here. So, moving forward, the awareness series will continue with 1 new episode each month because these conversations matter and this work doesn't stop when March ends. Today's guest is someone who's had a real impact on the brain injury community. I'm joined by David Harrington, President and CEO at the Center for Neuro Skills, one of the premier brain injury rehabilitation programs in the country. Now, CNS has helped thousands of individuals navigate life after brain injury, from early recovery through long-term rebuilding. David has been at the forefront of that work, helping shape how care is delivered, how patients are supported, and how recovery is approached beyond just the clinical setting. And for me, this one's personal. I've experienced CNS firsthand, both inpatient and outpatient. So I've seen the impact of this work up close. Today, we're talking about what makes their approach different, what recovery really looks like over time, and what still needs to change in brain injury care. Without further ado, David, welcome to Brain to Brain.
Hey, Evan, it is such a pleasure to be here with you. When we connected a couple of weeks ago, the energy that you brought, man, I feel it, man. It's good to be here with you, and I'm proud to be on your show. Thank you for the advocacy that you're doing. Thank you for the show and just getting good messages out there. We need it in our space. So
really
I'm honored to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all those kind words. Now, I alluded to it in the introduction, but for those who may not be familiar, can you introduce yourself more in depth and share how you found your way into the brain injury field?
Yeah, thank you. David Harrington, and I've been around the field for over 27 years or so. And it's interesting to hear everyone's course to brain injury, right? Whether you're a survivor, caregiver, provider, many of us have some type of an experience with brain injury. Early on, when I was 20 years old, I was an architect major, waiting to go away to school. I needed a job before I left, and I got a job at Center for Neuro Skills as a direct care staff at a residential site. And Evan, I was 20 years old, and honestly, it was overwhelming. I could barely take care of myself, let alone somebody else, right? So fortunately, CNS kept me around, and I'll tell you, and I sometimes get emotional talking about it. There's one particular patient named Dale, and he came in. He was an elderly gentleman from the Pacific Northwest, and he worked in the logging industry, and kind of a rough, tough guy. One you didn't want to mess with on the streets, right? And he was confused and agitated. He had a lot of, anger and physical aggression over food. And he was a tough person to work with, but I really there was a soft spot in my heart for Dale. And I got to see Dale in the 3 months that he was at Center for Neuro Skills. And I was part of his treatment team out on the residential side. To see him come from that confused, agitated, physically aggressive person to a person who was kind, and his personality came back. But what really galvanized my experience was I was able to take a trip home with him to the Pacific Northwest. And I remember, Evan, the day that he opened the car door, and his family were there, and they ran out, his grandkids, his kids, his wife, and they greeted him with a hug. And Dale wasn't a patient, he was a father, he was a husband, he was a grandfather. And to see Dale reconnect with those life roles was so impactful that it made me kind of set down the T-Square and the CAD program and pick up some therapy bands and Theraball. That's when I decided to become a therapist, and I became an occupational therapist, for a myriad of reasons. But I would also say too that over the course of years, everyone is struck by brain injury in some way
Hmm.
or another. My mother passed away about 15 years ago. Well, now it's actually been closer to 17 from a glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive brain tumor.
Mm.
And my uncle had a stroke and a TBI. And I'll tell you that being on the other side of healthcare, even with my knowledge and my network and everything that I had, I even on the patient side, I felt the complexity of healthcare. I felt the complacency and even at times cruelty as I navigated my mom and my uncle through the system, and it can be completely overwhelming. And so I'm just so honored to be here at CNS and to be in the position that I'm in as the CEO, to where, number one, I can make an impact on people's lives around me, whether it's Adele and his family, or even someone like my uncle or my mom. But if I can give and we can give that experience that really shines a light to the path for people who are walking blindly down this various catastrophic path, we want to be that light, and leveraging that experience to CNS so that we create a better experience in a dark time of a person's life. That's what brings me life.
I love that. And you said it, a dark time, y'all bring light into their life. That was certainly felt for my story because it's hideous. I mean, you've seen it firsthand with family,
Yeah.
but when your life is just flipped upside down, me coming from a sales rep, a former news anchor and reporter, I was living by myself. I was on track to be very successful. And then the accident happened, and I find myself at an inpatient facility, CNS, Center for Neuro Skills. It was tough. I was in a bad headspace, but you mentioned it with Dale, where you got to see firsthand. You said he wasn't a patient, and I want our listeners to really tune into that because you got to work with him in the facility. You weren't his son, you weren't his brother, but you got to see him in that role after he was discharged. You saw his family greet him. And I think that was one of the most powerful things that I saw. I wasn't treated as a patient at the Center for Neuro Skills. I was treated as Evan, as a guy who was on the path to try to get part of his life path or back. And I think that is what sets y'all apart. And I want to dive into that because you're with CNS. You've seen other rehab facilities. I've been to 19, including CNS, and it's a different program. And it's really what sets y'all apart across the country. So let's talk about the structure first off, where it felt like I was getting back into a 9 to 5 per se, because at inpatient, we'd be shuttled to the rehab facility. And I'm not going to talk about it. I want you to, but talk about the daily programming for these patients. I know they all vary, but some of the structure stays the same.
Yeah, boy, I can Evan, I can talk a long time on this, and I'll try to be as concise, and maybe you can ask some more questions. I really truly see what we do as a healing ecosystem and a recovery ecosystem with many parts. Of course, a brain injury is very complex. People are very complex, and you need a comprehensive team that's highly trained, working together for the goal of that individual.
Hmm.
And really that's how we really set everything up at Center for Neuro Skills. And I can dive into the clinical aspect and as well as the residential aspect, which the residential aspect is a treatment setting as well. But it's everything from addressing physical needs, cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and ultimately the functional roles. You going back to work as a podcaster, and reigniting that passion you have for interviewing people and media that you're so good at, and having you reclaim your life and role in independence. And that's it really doesn't matter so much what we do in the clinic. It's really what you do outside the clinic, right?
Hmm.
And being able to
Hmm.
translate that out. But it really does take a comprehensive team that's highly trained in brain injury. Everything from the case manager on the clinical side, who I would say is that lightning rod or the clearinghouse for all the stakeholders. They're the insurance companies, the patient, the family, the treatment team, I spent about 4 years as a case manager, and gosh, there was one time as one of my cases, one of our patients, there were about 25 different entities involved in that case.
Wow.
And all with competing um, interests, right?
Mm.
But, physical therapy, occupational therapy, recreational therapy, speech therapy, counseling, education, nursing, health, fitness, all of our nurses and all of our physicians all working together at the clinic. But we also have the residential site, which we purposely, it's a different location because, and I can get into some of the values that make us different here in a moment, but it is that rhythm of living. We don't get up and necessarily go down the hall. In this day and age, that's more common than it was in the past. But we would get up, we would get our breakfast, we would get dressed, and then we would leave for work. And that's what we do at CNS. And
Mhm.
so it's that structure, it's the routine. But I also would say a couple key parts of our healing and recovery ecosystem would be our research department. We get fantastic outcomes. We look at our outcomes every single month, but they're not good enough for us. We
Mm.
want to get to a point where we're almost doubling what we're doing now, and it's going to require us integrating the neuroscience. And so we have a research department that's looking at other ways that we can complement our traditional therapy. But we're also a very data-oriented company. We want to understand this injury, this disease causative, disease accelerative issue, so that we can provide better treatment year over year over year and really help us to advance the science. So that's really kind of the structure in general, but I think some of the values that we have are also differentiating factors.
You described a very complex system, easy for our listeners to digest it. And it's so important for that. I mean, I was unaware that y'all had a research team going to better understand and improve treatment. And that, so living it, I want to share this quick anecdote. I would wake up, we were not required, if you're a breakfast person, cook your own breakfast, because it's those little things like you said, where you don't think about it pre-injury, but then post-injury, those are the challenging things. I really struggled and still struggle with this, is following lists for cooking. I'll skip steps, but y'all helped instill strategies for me to get better with that. And what was also cool, living in that house, you're with other brain injury survivors. You're fostering a community when this injury is so isolating. Now I'm sitting in the living room with four other guys. It's amazing, and we're in it's all demographics. It's all construction workers, even CEOs. I mean, it's wild. It's a melting pot, and you just see that brain injuries do not discriminate. I mean,
They do not.
everybody. It's crazy. And I think that was one of my takeaways is you, aside from all the therapies, the speech therapy, educational, physical therapy, you gave me friends. And that's for lifelong friends. I text them monthly, weekly, and we check in with each other. And I make a point to do that with other survivors that I met along the way, but CNS was very different in that aspect because we grew a bond and y'all facilitated that, which is, I don't know if that was meant to happen or that was part of the structure, but I think that for me, that's what really set y'all apart is being in the thick of it with other people that understood.
I mean that is powerful, and gosh, to be able to create that community for you during your journey to on recovery, that is so important. And I'm glad that we were able to foster that. We hear that a lot. There are times where families will come and they're jaded because of what happened in more of the acute settings, or perhaps they didn't get treatment and their loved one went home. However that might look. But to be able to walk into CNS and people say, "What do you put in the water here? What kind of Kool-Aid are they drinking?" And I just where the outcomes are so important to me and to our staff. But part of the reason why I get to wake up is I get to work with some of the most amazing people in the entire world, and it's my colleagues, it's our staff, because I know that they're facilitating that impact. They are mission-driven people, and it is part of that, again, that healing and recovery ecosystem that's so important. We need our staff to be able to translate that culture and to envelop our patients in that recovery process and support them along that way. But you're so right. There's been so many times where even I, as a therapist, I would have a group of patients and I would encourage them and I'd push them. But boy, when they would get together, they would compete. And
Yes.
there is no amount of competition I could foster than another patient working with another patient. It was cool. It was
hmm
cool.
Oh, it's amazing. It's great motivation. And that was one of the most impactful moments for me. And it was inspiring because it showed real time the impact that you were having on the other men inside the house. I was with a gentleman who owned his own company, and at one point he couldn't pick up a strainer and carry it from one end of the kitchen to the other. He would have to drag it. And I think we lived in that house together for at least a month. Towards the end of that month, he was picking it up and he was rinsing the blueberries in it. Still challenged with that task, but it's so cool because, like you said, you have these therapists that are dedicated, that are excited, and look to make meaningful change. This podcast was created because of one of your therapists. This was an assignment that she gave me. It was a take-home assignment. And, at the house, we had binders, right, with paperwork to work on skills, but it's those real-time skills where she sat me down, just like you and Dale. I wasn't a patient to her. I was a human. And she wanted me to get back to what I love to do. And as a result, we now have this platform for you to come onto the show. I mean, that's why I'm so giddy. It's you are the reason that therapist was hired to create this show. That's insane.
That is insane. I full circle, brother. Man, I'm so glad that we were part of your life. And now you're doing this, man. Look at the impact you're making on people. And we need more people like you. I mean, just between your brand and the podcast, your book, you are a leader in the industry, and we need more people like Evan, right?
Thank
But
you.
I just compliment you so much because of the impact you're making and taking that journey and really making something meaningful out of it. And the impact that you have just ripples throughout the world, man.
Thank you. Thank
Well
you. Those
done.
are very kind words. I appreciate you saying that. I was fortunate enough at my first inpatient facility before discharge. This was right after my accident, I think a week or two after trauma ER, where they mentioned CNS. I had never heard of it. My family had never heard of it. Now, granted, the memory of it, I had no memory back then, but I specifically remember my mom saying, that was so helpful. And I think the biggest thing is educating and spreading awareness. So that's one of the reasons I brought you onto the show. But for other people listening that have never heard of CNS, what's your advice for them? How would you encourage them to check out this facility?
That is a great question. And in fact, I often tell our staff, with 3.5, 3.2 million brain injuries every single year, we're going to treat 1,000. So you have less than 0.01% chance of coming to CNS. And so the course to CNS is not linear, and it can be very difficult. And some of the challenges that we have upstream in some of the referral sources, they're looking for the easy discharge. They're
Hmm.
looking for a skilled nursing facility, or they're looking for home because they're going to be able to get them out sooner. And we have, gosh, over 40 different liaisons around Texas, California, across the United States, just making a presence in hospitals and various care units to make sure that people know that this treatment is available, and most people don't.
Hmm.
What I would encourage anyone who really hasn't heard of CNS is to look at our website, www.neuroskills.com. It has a lot of really great information as you're walking this path. There's a lot of videos and testimonies, especially if you're feeling alone, you're feeling you need some validation. Our patients are the best at really communicating what that journey and how they walked it. But that can also give people an opportunity to connect with us, whether it's through email or through social media or just even a telephone call. The challenge that we have as a post acute residential provider are the benefits, and how does that get funded? We've been pushing for Medicare, Medicaid to fund
Mm.
this type of program, and they don't. And that you talk about so many people who need this level of care, but it's not getting funded. We are fortunate that we have very good contracts with most of the major payers around the nation, but still people are getting denied. And even
Mhm.
once people get referred to us, there's a certain percentage of referrals that are denied because of no medical necessity, or they don't need the rehab, or whatever reason that the insurance company comes up with. So it means that we have to, on CNS's end, really advocate for every referral and make sure we're turning every stone over to get access to care, because even when people have insurance, the path to CNS is still very, very difficult. As CNS, we are highly involved in the Brain Injury Association of America. We're trying to advocate. And gosh, if you can't get, we have a lot of good competitors too. We just want to make sure that people are getting the care they need. Um, but to really circle back to your question, Evan, it's really a matter of connect with us on social media, connect with us through our website, give us a call, and maybe we can help you out.
Mhm.
But there are real legitimate problems with people with brain injuries getting access to care that they need.
I think that's one of the most discouraging things as a survivor and as somebody that has seen other brain injury survivors get discharged because insurance says, you know what, you had 10 sessions, it's time to go home. It's heartbreaking. And I'm happy to hear that y'all are fighting, and challenging those insurance companies and really pushing for Medicaid and Medicare. And in part, aside from building a community and spreading awareness, that's why 10% of our profits go to support people with brain injuries to help keep them in therapy. I do. So I went to CNS twice. I did inpatient, outpatient. They were months apart. I love this question because somebody listening that has a brain injury might still be, challenged with certain deficits. They might think, I'm 3 years out. I don't need to go back to rehab. What would you say to them that the benefits of returning to a facility like CNS where it is never too late?
It's interesting, and I'll even back up a little bit. We're 47 years old, Center for Neuro Skills, and at the time, the conventional wisdom was that if you had a brain injury, there was no hope for you.
Hmm.
In our early days, Dr. Mark Ashley and others were really trying to challenge people to recover through various exercising by borrowing things from orthopedics and developmental issues. And that's really how we really began. That's kind of why we're so data oriented, because we need to prove what we did work. Of course, we know with the neuroscience now that there's synaptogenesis. You can create new synapses and connections. There's neurogenesis, where you can create new neurons. There's angiogenesis, where you can develop new blood vessels to connect all of that together. And if we put people in an environment where their brain is going to be stressed, the brain will respond to that. And this is where even the inpatient program is so important, because as you said, Evan, earlier, if you're sitting there cooking, you've got to work on balance, coordination, you've got to problem
Hmm.
solve, you have to sequence things, and all of that environmental stress really helps us to rewire the brains. And I like to say that's what we do for a living. We rewire brains, right?
Yeah.
And and so we have a few values here at CNS that I do feel differentiates us from everyone else. And I learned them as a direct care staff before I became a therapist, before I became the CEO. It's in my DNA. And it's number one, patients don't plateau.
Hmm.
Programs do. Programs plateau. So when we start seeing a patient start to decline, and of course, recovery is not linear, we've got to change up the program. And so we need to apply that environmental stress, or we need to connect someone that maybe they're not motivated by therapy and they need to do a project like a broadcasting, to really kind of integrate all of these skills. But also environmental validity, making sure that people are also not only doing work in the clinic, but they're doing it in real life. And this is where our apartments, our residential settings, so important. Getting people out to work is important, or climbing ladders, or using power tools, or that rhythm of living. You wake up, and that structure and routine on a daily basis and is very important. In fact, we say with structure comes freedom. The more structure I have, the more automatic things are, and it frees up my mental capacity, my cognitive capacity to bring in new stuff. But if I'm always changing my routine, I'm focused on what's next versus you know doing things in autopilot so that I can receive some of that new information. And that bias for action, meaning if there's a problem, we're going to solve it and we're not going to wait. And so it's important for people who've had a brain injury and perhaps they haven't had treatment for a long time. It's never too late. We've had people admit into CNS after 2 years of not having therapy. Their loved ones thought that they had plateaued, and we've seen people reclaim their life and their independence to go back to work. And it's never too late because the brain won't stop connecting as long as you provide the just right challenge.
Say that louder so our audience can hear that, because I mean, that old school way of thinking is so frustrating. I heard that when I was in the hospital, or my mom did, where it's like, hey, clock starts now. You're going to see the biggest improvements in about a year, and then he's going to plateau. And I think that was one of the coolest things that I got to experience at your facility was when I did start testing really well, they threw a curveball at me, and they had me host a like a Family Feud style game for the rest of the clinic. And I was, crapping my pants. I was like, whoa, this is uncomfortable. But you're right. It stops the plane from being on autopilot, and you
Yeah.
challenge them. What kind of responses have you received from family members or loved ones or friends that have, seen this real-time progress? I think that's important for our audience to hear as well, because the success that y'all have had, I mean, data is important too, and you guys track that. So give us a scope at that data from the success that we see at CNS, and then also the testimonies you've heard from family.
Yeah, I would love to, and this can go many different directions, and I think it's all important. On the data side, we collect so much data, not only residentially, it's over 350 data points residentially that we're collecting every single week on a person's activities of daily living, their initiation behavior, and we use that data clinically. We have all kinds of outcome scales. The Mayo Portland Adaptability Inventory is one of them that we use kind of in our space. And we're very proud of, from the admission Mayo Portland to the discharge Mayo Portland. And, we usually range between 20%, 25%. We want to get that up to 35% and 40%. And the data is important because it's a good tool to advocate for continued treatment. And I would say that the length of stay that we get for our patients is really, it really does make a difference because we
Mhm.
collected data. We had to prove that we're making progress. And it's unlike orthopedics, where if someone has a hand injury, they can measure range of motion. It's very simple. But how do you measure brain improvement? And
Mhm.
and how do you measure it in a week? And so the data is important. And as a family member is there with their loved one, they may not see the changes day to day. But what has also been impactful is if someone comes once a week or once every 2 weeks, they're seeing these big gaps um, in observation. They're like, wow, you're walking better, you're talking better, you're understanding more of what I'm saying. And so that's helpful a lot of times. And I think that's important because a lot of the people we treat, the survivors, they're not seeing the progress on a day-to-day basis
Mhm.
either. They're living in their body, and it's so minute that you almost need that data, and you need that family member to say, hey, Evan, you're making great progress, you couldn't do this last week, and wow, what a difference. And to be just envelop them in that encouragement, I think is so important.
Mhm.
For us, we keep in tabs on our patients for over 10 years after they leave us, because it's important for us to make sure that outcome is durable, that it people don't decompensate once they leave us. And we're pleased that the durability of outcome is very, very strong. And a lot of times people continue to get better once they leave us. But it is that structure, the routine, the constant environmental stress that people are putting themselves in, like you, always challenging yourself. I'm so
Mhm.
inspired by what you've done, Evan, in terms of the continual challenge that you put yourself in. Um, and so that's where it's important. It's the data and the family being able to recognize how that person is reclaiming their life role and independence.
Mhm. Oh my gosh. It's data. I love that y'all track data, and I love that you track or keep up with the patients post discharge, 10 years afterwards, because that it shows how much you care. And I think one or two of the chapters in my book, it's funny, I wrote it and I do not remember a lot of it, so I'll have to reread it, which is fun. It's like reading a new book every time, and that's the bad memory. But I wrote about that because you dialed in on a key point where the chapter is called The Man in the Mirror, where on a day-to-day basis, as myself, I'm not seeing that progress.
Mm.
And I have a very good friend that I did inpatient with at CNS where we'll call maybe quarterly. And it's the same thing. Evan, I'm not seeing it. Like I feel like I'm not getting better. It's so frustrating. And then I bring him back to the early days where we shared that house together and it clicks. So it's so important for the caregivers, loved ones, and family members to hear that because you are making a positive impact on the recovery because you need to be reminded of how far you've come. And my mom does a fantastic job of that. My brother does a fantastic job of that. My girlfriend does a fantastic job of that. Even within this almost 2-year span of dating, she tracks that progress too. And it's continuously evolving. And I love, love, love that you mentioned that. And that kind of dovetails into this next question that I have for you, success. How would you define success in a neuro rehab setting? Again, you talked about data, you talked about, A to B, but for you who operates this incredible company and it goes all the way down to the patient, but what does success look like to you?
That's a really great question. You know, we always measure the outcomes like you shared. We hang our hat on that. We want to make sure we're making a big impact. But every life is different. Every person's role is different, and I think the real success is once a person leaves our program, have they have they retained, regained their role to some degree, and perhaps that role has changed.
Mhm.
There's meaningful life after brain injury. It's not the end. This is an episode in your life, and now you have the rest of your life to either reclaim your life and independence, your role, or to redefine it. And it may not look the same as before, but it can still be so meaningful and impactful for us. And we've touched upon it a few times here, Evan. Is I can remember as a therapist, one of my tasks was to do a ladder evaluation on a fireman,
Hmm.
and so, of course, we would do these with certain patients, but for him, it was a matter of what do we do for that environmental validity, getting them back in all the garb, the fireman garb, the heavy coat, the heavy pants. This guy had axes hanging off of his pants and everything else like that. He was ready to go, but he got halfway up the ladder and he froze. And
Hmm.
I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I'm panicking." He had PTSD because that's how he fell. He fell while
Hmm.
climbing a ladder. And all of a sudden it turned into a counseling session. And I often think of, gosh, if we had not put him in that situation, would he have gotten back to work and failed? But
Hmm.
because we did it in the rehab process, we just integrated the ladder evaluation into his normal counseling routine. And he went back and he reclaimed his life role, his life role as a fireman. But it can be anyone. It could be a mom who really wants to hold the baby and change the baby and develop, or the college student who wants to go back and play soccer. Um, to me, the real success is the individual story and them leaving CNS with purpose, meaning, and a goal to achieve. That the injury does not define them; it's a part of them, but they are en route to really define their own life, even if it may look different than before.
Mm. Powerful words. I love how you said reclaim your life or redefine it. And I was again in that dark place when I first entered CNS. I had lost it, right? I was no longer working for that Fortune 500 company. I wasn't doing sales, which was a fun challenge for me. I wasn't in LA anymore. And that was a tough pill to swallow, knowing that lifestyle would not come back given the deficits that I have now. But through the rehab, through the counseling that you provided at CNS and really buying into what they were saying. In the beginning, I was reluctant to talk to somebody. I wanted to suppress the emotions, but their strength in going to therapy, they were able to help me redefine this new life that I have. And sure, I can't work that 9 to 5 again, but I built this podcast and a company, and that's a testament to how powerful the treatment is that y'all provide. And I hope that people listening either look up the Center for Neuro Skills to do more research, and talk to their doctors and see if they can get, a referral to work with y'all, because you are changing lives, hundreds, thousands of lives throughout these decades of work that you've provided. I do, we're closing this segment out, but I do want you to get the final word to add anything we may have missed on, and then also include where your facilities are located throughout the country.
Okay. Yeah, closing words, keep driving forward. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. What I would encourage people to do if they've had a brain injury, whether you're a survivor, caregiver, is to plug into a network of people. The Brain Injury Association of America is a really great place to plug into, support groups, to know that you're not alone, and walk this journey with people, other caregivers, survivors, and providers. And again, like I said earlier, that the brain injury does not define you. It's a part of you, but you have the ability to reclaim or redefine your life. It's not over. And Evan, I love your black dot example. And it's such a powerful thing that you taught me, and apparently our one of our counselors taught you. There's just so much more on the page than the black dot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really, really important. So plug in. And when providers tell you that there's nothing else they can do, don't listen. This is where you need to be a contrarian and say, I'm going to do more, and I'm going to define my life. I'm going to keep pushing forward. I'm not going to listen to these experts that say there's nothing left for me. So defy the conventional wisdom, in essence. And so I would encourage anyone to plug into those networks, to of course keep listening to your podcast, Evan. You're doing such great work, and you're giving a lot of really great guidance. And connect with the Brain Injury Association of America, that has a lot of support. But connect with CNS, Center for Neuro Skills, whether it's through our website or social media, and give us a call to see how we might be able to help you. And if we can't help you, we want to direct you to resources that might be able to help you. We do have now 8 locations. I'm proud to say that we opened our 8th location just a few weeks ago. We actually
Congratulations.
opened it at the very beginning of the year, but we had the opening house a few weeks ago. So our California locations are in Bakersfield, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. We have a very large clinic in Dallas, Texas. We're also in Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, and we just opened up a new location in Plano.
My goodness, 2 great states, 2 states
That's
that I
right.
lived in and had professional careers in. So I applaud your location. Y'all, Texas, California, reach out to CNS. They are changing lives. And David, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast with me. You are making a tremendous impact on so many lives, and every therapist and employee at CNS is doing the same, and they show up every day with the enthusiasm that we need as survivors to encourage and challenge us to just make a difference every day in how we're recovering. But without anything else, I've been talking too much. David, you're an incredible human being. Thank you again. That wraps up our awareness series for the month of March. We'll see you next month.